In a prison, there was a man named Ray. He was on the phone with a radio announcer named Dr. Marjorie. Ray talked about the fact that he would soon be free. While he was chatting, a prisoner interrupted Ray. Ray was annoyed, and without further ado, he hit the man. Day after day passed until the day Ray was released from prison. Before Ray left, he returned some of the books he had read while in prison. Ray liked reading books about dinosaurs. After he returned the books, Ray met a warden. Ray asked about what a prisoner who was released from prison did. The warden said that ex-prisoners usually do stupid things that put them back in prison. The warden also advised Ray not to do stupid things like the previous prisoners. Ray then walked out of the prison happily. A few meters away, a man named LaRue approached Ray in his sports car. He was Ray's old friend when Ray was a robber who was feared by the whole city. LaRue then invited him to become a robber again, but Ray said that if LaRue wanted Ray to become a robber, then Ray would drive LaRue's car. Innocently, LaRue immediately believed Ray. Unfortunately, when Ray sat in the driver's seat, Ray immediately left LaRue on the road. Then Ray decided to stay in his apartment. He wanted to see his daughter and ex-wife tomorrow, so Ray shaved his beard and dressed up. In the morning, Ray headed to his ex-wife's house. His ex-wife was Lynn's. When he arrived at Lynn's house, Ray immediately knocked on her house boldly. Sadly, Lynn didn't welcome Ray happily. Instead, Lynn berated him for being an ex-prisoner and also a failed father. Shortly afterwards, Ray's daughter, named Sally, came from school. Sally looked at Ray with anger and disappointment. Ray tried to give her flowers and a teddy bear, but Sally ignored Ray and just left. The next day, Ray went to Sally's school. He was not desperate to make Sally trust Ray again. He approached Sally and explained that Ray was no longer like he used to be. He had assured Sally that he had changed for the better. Hearing that, Sally still couldn't trust her father again. Sally even said that she would pretend that her father didn't exist like when he was in prison. Shortly after Sally left, Ray heard the sound of a firecracker. Ray then looked for the source of the sound of the firecrackers. There were two students fighting and Ray stopped them. At the same time, Sally's homeroom teacher named Miss Miller came over to Ray and the two children. She thanked Ray for stopping them. Miss Miller then said that next week Sally's class would be going on a tour of the dinosaur museum. She invited Ray to join them if Ray had nothing to do. Hearing that, Ray instantly agreed to Miss Miller's invitation. However, Sally, who found out about it, was angry with her father. She didn't like it when Ray would go to the dinosaur museum. Sally even told Ray that if Ray went on the trip, then Sally would rather not go. Hearing that, Ray just stood still and thought. Later that evening at Ray's apartment, LaRue came to ask Ray to join him on a bank robbery mission. Ray still refused LaRue's invitation. Ray refused because LaRue had betrayed him in the past, and Ray was arrested and sent to prison. Even so, LaRue continued to seduce Ray until Ray became angry. Ray even almost beat LaRue. In the morning, Ray returned to Lynn's house to talk to her, but a man came out of Lynn's house, and the man was named Marvin. He was Lynn's new boyfriend. Marvin then explained that Lynn and Marvin were together. Not long after, Lynn came over to Ray and Marvin. Marvin deliberately made Ray jealous by kissing Lynn in front of him. However, it didn't make Ray jealous. Then Lynn said that she and Sally had built a new life without Ray in it. Hearing that, Ray then explained that he wanted to get a second chance to make Lynn and Sally happy. She didn't believe that Ray could make them happy because Ray was unemployed. Lynn's words made Ray realize that he had to find a job. Days passed and Ray tried to apply for a job at the office, but the head of the office rejected Ray because he knew that Ray was an ex-prisoner. Then Ray applied for a job at a restaurant. At first, Ray was accepted, but Ray made a mistake. Ray commented on the chef's small body because he didn't eat enough cholesterol foods like meat. This got Ray fired right then and there. Ray was frustrated because he applied for jobs here and there and was not accepted. Finally, Ray thought of joining LaRue and his friends to rob a bank. As night fell, Ray came up to LaRue at the bar. He said that he wanted to join LaRue. LaRue seemed happy to hear that. Ray then asked about the details of the robbery plan. When morning came, Ray, LaRue, and their friends drove a car to a bank. They divided the tasks. LaRue and his two friends would rob the bank. Meanwhile, Ray stayed in the car to drive. When they arrived in front of the bank, LaRue immediately rushed into the bank wearing a mask. Shortly afterwards, he managed to take the money and was about to run away. Meanwhile, Ray, who was still in the car, saw Sally's school bus right near the bank. This made Ray realize that being a robber was a stupid thing. Ray then decided to abandon his intention to become a robber and threw away the car keys. He then approached Sally and her friends. He entered the bus and joined them. Sally, who saw her father come in, went straight to Ray. She told him to get off the bus, but Ray refused because he wanted to accompany Sally. Meanwhile, LaRue and her two friends headed to the car. They were shocked to see that Ray wasn't in the car. Moreover, they couldn't find the car keys. They were furious at Ray for leaving like that. Soon the sound of police cars was getting closer, which made them panic. They finally decided to run away by running. However, one of LaRue's men was left behind. He was carrying a bag containing money from the bank robbery. The man was so scared and panicked to see the police coming that his bag fell near Sally's school bus. He didn't care about the bag and ran off again. Seeing that there was a bag near the trunk, the bus driver put the bag into the bus because he didn't know that the bag contained money. Meanwhile, LaRue's men hoped he could meet LaRue. Unfortunately, on the way, the police ran into the man and arrested him. Seeing his friend arrested by the police made LaRue quickly hide. On the way, LaRue stole a car to chase the bus because LaRue knew that the bag that contained the money was accidentally put into the trunk by the bus driver. When they chased the school bus, they saw Ray on the bus, so they thought that it was Ray's plan to take control of the money by himself. But shortly afterward, they crashed into the car in front of them because they were driving while watching the bus. While on the bus, Ray tried to approach and talk to his daughter. Not long after Ray was next to Sally, a boy sprayed Ray with chewing gum. Knowing this, Ray went over to the boy and took the straw for him to squeeze. The boy looked at Ray with a scared look. Moments later, the bus arrived at the dinosaur museum. They then entered the museum. Sadly, the attendant said that the tour guide couldn't come because of sickness, so there was no one to guide and explain about dinosaurs to the students. Ray, who liked reading books about dinosaurs, offered to take the place of the tour guide. Then they started the tour. They visited the dinosaur statues, one by one with Ray as the tour guide. After Ray introduced the various dinosaurs, he suddenly saw LaRue and his men in the museum. Ray, who saw that, told all the students to get into the bus first, while Ray went to the bathroom to attract LaRue to come to him. Then they both entered the bathroom. Ray instantly beat them mercilessly. Then Ray said once again that he didn't want to deal with them anymore. But Lore explained that the money from the robbery was on the bus, so they both thought that Ray was planning it. Ray then returned to the bus and decided to drive the bus himself because he waited for the bus driver for a long time. Long story short, they arrived at the next destination of the tour. Ray then checked the trunk of the bus. He was right to find a bag containing the money from the robbery. Ray also received a call from Lore, who said that Ray had to return the bag because if he didn't, they would do bad things to Sally. Knowing that, Ray intended to return the bag to Lore. As Ray was about to return the bag to Lore, Ray saw the police coming. Lore knew the police were coming, so she and her men left immediately. The police continued to chase the two of them, but they cleverly managed to trick the police by pretending to be members of the festival. In the afternoon, Lore and his men went to a place. It was a Mexican gangster headquarters. Lore wanted to get the money back from Ray. Therefore, Lore asked for their help. In another place, Sally sang by the lake, and then Sally's friend named Josh approached her. They chatted casually, and it seemed that they were getting closer. Shortly, the day's journey was over. Ray and the kids returned to the hotel where they were staying. Not long after, the driver of the bus that Ray had left behind approached their bus. Ray secured the bag with the money. He then took the bag to his room. Ray decided to call LaRue and tell him to get the money. But LaRue told Ray to deliver the money to a warehouse where the Mexican gangsters were. Before Ray delivered the money, Ray asked Miss Miller for permission to take a walk with Sally, his daughter. Sally and Ray then walked around the hotel. They seemed to be getting closer and happy. Sally began to open her heart to Ray again. They then went to a record store and bought a music cassette. Afterwards, Ray took Sally out to eat at a fancy restaurant, and they enjoyed themselves. Meanwhile, at the hotel, two policemen approached Miss Miller. They asked for Ray's whereabouts while showing Ray's photo. Soon Ray took Sally back to the hotel. However, Sally was surprised to find that the people in the hotel were watching the news about the robbery. Sally saw a picture of her father on the TV, which meant Ray was a fugitive. Sally felt disappointed with her father. Then she rushed back to see her father, who was still outside the hotel. She immediately scolded Ray. Ray didn't want Sally to misunderstand, so he explained everything. Ray said that he didn't want to be a robber anymore, and he had changed. Sally, who heard that, was touched. She believed in her father's words once again. Seeing that, Ray told Sally to take the bag that contained the money in their hotel room, while Ray would wait for Sally outside. A few moments later, Sally brought the bag and handed it to her father. Ray then told Sally to return to the room because Ray was afraid that Laurie would kidnap Sally. Sally went back to the room right away. Unfortunately, Laru and one of his men were already at the hotel. They then arrested Sally and took her away from the hotel. Meanwhile, Ray arrived at the warehouse that Laru was referring to. But Ray was surprised to see 3 people in the warehouse, but there was no Laru. The 3 of them then told Ray to come in and prepare to beat Ray up. Before they could beat Ray up, however, Ray beat up the 3 of them first. So there was a battle between Ray and the Mexican gangsters. A few moments later, Ray managed to beat the 3 of them easily. Then Ray got a call from Laru, who said that he was holding Sally hostage. Laru told Ray to meet him somewhere. Ray agreed, but on the condition that Sally must be in a fine condition or Ray would kill Laru. Then Ray went to Laru's place by taxi. Ray told the driver to take Sally to the hotel after Sally got into the taxi. When Ray arrived at Laru's place, Ray then told Sally to get into the taxi while Laru took the bag of money in the trunk. Then the driver drove Sally to the hotel. When Sally arrived at the hotel, 2 policemen asked about the whereabouts of Sally's father. She said that her father was not part of the robbery because Ray was with Sally and her friends. Sally also said that she didn't know where her father was. Hearing that, the police allowed Sally to meet with her friends. Then Sally told Josh about her father being in danger. Their conversation was overheard by Sally's friends named Beanie and Simon. They intended to help Sally save her father. Simon, who was good at technology, then tracked Ray's position by using Ray's phone number. After they found Ray's location, they set off firecrackers to distract Miss Miller and the police. When the police were distracted, Sally, Josh, Simon, and Benny went to the building where Ray was. Sally bravely drove the bus, followed by her friends and one of Sally's girlfriends. Meanwhile, Laru opened the bag, which turned out that the contents were not money but pillows. Seeing that, Laru was angry. Then he pointed a gun at Ray. Laru then took Ray to a building where the Mexican gangsters were. Laru tied Ray up and interrogated him. Laru even punched Ray to make Ray tell him where the money was. Soon Sally, Josh, Benny, and Simon arrived at the location. Sally told them to split up. Meanwhile, Sally's girlfriend called the police because she was afraid that someone would get hurt. Then Benny set off a firecracker, which surprised Laru and his men. However, Laru's men finally managed to find Benny. Thankfully, he couldn't catch Benny. Meanwhile, Ray called a radio announcer named Dr. Marjorie. At that time, she was broadcasting live. Dr. Marjorie then aired the situation Ray was facing in real time. Luckily, the police heard the live broadcast from the radio. They then rushed to Ray's location. Meanwhile, Sally and Josh tried to untie Ray's hands. They tried to escape, but unfortunately, Laru and his men came and prevented them from leaving by pointing a gun. Laru's men then said that this was actually Laru's plan to use Ray. Laru didn't realize that his conversation was heard by the entire audience through a radio broadcast. This proved that Ray was innocent in the robbery case. Ray then tried to beat Laru and his men. Lucky for him, the police soon arrived and arrested Laru and his men. Ray was not arrested because he was innocent. After the grueling incident, Ray got a new job. Sally has also accepted Ray back. So did Lynn, who decided to live with Ray and Sally all over again.